I guess I should start with how everything fell apart, but honestly, it was probably messed up way before I realized it. I'm Audrey, I'm 29, and I just blew up my entire life because, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. 6 months ago, I started this sales job at Anchor Office Solutions. Not exactly glamorous, right? But it was supposed to be my fresh start, my big break into something better. After jumping between dead-end jobs, I convinced myself this time would be different. Base salary was trash. Only 38K plus commission that barely covered gas money. But everyone kept saying how the real money comes once you build your client base. Meanwhile, my husband Carter, well, ex-husband now, was bringing in $55 as a maintenance supervisor at some manufacturing plant. Steady job, good benefits, the whole boring package. He never rubbed it in my face that he made more, never complained about covering most of our bills while I found my path or whatever. Maybe that made it worse somehow, like he was so accepting of carrying us that it made me feel like a failure. We had this tiny rental house that wasn't terrible, but wasn't exactly what I pictured for myself at almost 30. Carter was always saying we should focus on building our savings before looking at buying something. Always practical, always thinking long term. God, it used to drive me crazy how he'd track every dollar, pack his lunches, pick up extra shifts, just so we could have a cushion in our account. Then Julius Warner started at the office as our new regional sales director. First time I saw him pull up in his Tesla, wearing this perfectly tailored suit, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not just attraction, though yeah, obviously that too. But this feeling like maybe my life wasn't supposed to be about clipping coupons and watching Carter fix things around the house to save money. Julius noticed me right away. Started giving me special attention, saying I had natural talent for sales. He'd make time to personally train me, tell me stories about closing big deals, living in the nice part of town. Carter would ask about my day and I'd find myself downplaying these interactions, like I knew somewhere in my gut that something was shifting. Looking back, I can see all the warning signs. How I started calling Carter a decent guy in my head, like I was already creating distance. How I'd scroll through Facebook late at night, looking at people from high school posting about their vacations and new cars, feeling this pit in my stomach. Carter would just sleep peacefully next to me, probably dreaming about retirement accounts or whatever responsible thing occupied his mind. Julius kept finding reasons to pull me into meetings, saying he saw real potential in me. And yeah, maybe I knew what kind of potential he was really talking about, but I told myself it was purely professional. Even when he started texting me about strategy at 11 p.m. or scheduling client lunches that mysteriously turned into just us two, I kept pretending it was normal mentorship. Carter never questioned my late nights at the office, just heated up my dinner and asked if I'd eaten. His trust should have made me feel guilty. Instead, it made me resent him more. Like, how could he not see that I was meant for more than our little life? I convinced myself that we'd married too young, before I really knew what I wanted. Before I understood that some people are meant to be stepping stones to where you're really supposed to end up. God, I sound awful saying all this out loud. But if I'm telling this story, I might as well be honest about what a mess I made of everything. Because that was just the beginning. Just me setting up all these dominoes that were about to come crashing down in the most spectacular way possible. Things started getting messy around month 2. Julius wasn't even trying to hide his favoritism anymore. He'd call me into his office for these private, mentoring sessions that somehow always ran late. My phone would buzz with his texts at all hours, first about sales targets, then about my potential, then about how I deserve better than my current situation. I started keeping my phone face down at home, changing my passwords, stepping outside to take calls. The sad part? Carter noticed the changes, but just tried harder. He'd wait up with dinner, kept warm, ask about my day like he genuinely cared about these made-up client meetings I kept having. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me with this worried expression, but he never pushed, never questioned, just kept quietly handling our bills, fixing things around the house, being annoyingly dependable. I started dressing differently for work. Nothing crazy, but definitely not the clearance rack stuff I used to wear. Julius noticed, of course. He'd make these little comments about how I was evolving, coming into my own. One time he took me to this fancy client lunch where the wine list cost more than my weekly grocery budget. When I mentioned splitting the bill, he laughed like I'd said something adorably naive. That's when things started feeling different. Julius would find reasons to touch my arm during meetings, stand a little too close when reviewing reports. I knew exactly what was happening, but I kept telling myself it was just networking, just career development. Even when he started texting me good night or asking what I was wearing to tomorrow's meeting, I pretended it was normal mentor stuff. The worst part was how I started talking about Carter at work. When Julius would ask about my home life, I'd say things like, "Oh, Carter's a decent guy," or "We married young, you know how that goes." Like I was already creating this narrative where my marriage was some starter relationship I'd outgrown. Julius ate it up, obviously. He'd say things like, "Sometimes we have to make hard choices to reach our full potential, or not everyone is meant to grow with us." I started staying later and later at the office. Julius would always find some reason we needed to review numbers or prep for meetings. One night, we ordered takeout and ate it in his office while he told me about his beach house, his investment portfolio, all these things that made my life with Carter feel small and provincial. When he brushed my hair back from my face, I didn't stop him. When he said I deserved someone who could give me the world, I pretended not to know what he meant. Carter just kept being Carter, making sure I had gas in my car, asking if I needed anything from the store, supporting my career growth without question. His simple trust made me feel simultaneously guilty and angry. Like, how could he not see what was happening? How could he just keep loving me when I was so obviously pulling away? Sometimes I think he did know, but loving me was such a habit he couldn't stop, even when he should have. Then came the Napa Valley trip. God, just saying those words makes my stomach turn now. Julius announced this regional training weekend, like it was totally normal for a boss to take one employee wine tasting. I mean, yeah, there was supposed to be this whole team going, but somehow everyone else had conflicts or wasn't ready for this level of training. Looking back, I wonder if they all knew exactly what was happening and just had more sense than me. I rehearsed my pitch to Carter for days. Made it sound all professional and mandatory, throwing around terms like sales certification and regional development. I even printed out some random training schedules I found online, just in case he asked questions. But Carter just didn't. He was excited for me, proud even. Started picking up extra shifts right away to help cover what he thought were training costs. The worst part? He drove me to the airport at 5 a.m., carrying my suitcase, the new one I'd bought specially for this trip, and telling me how proud he was of my dedication to building my career. I remember standing at security, watching him wave goodbye, and feeling this weird mix of guilt and resentment. Like, why did he have to be so supportive? Why couldn't he just be a jerk and make this easier? I'd practiced taking off my wedding ring in the bathroom mirror for a week before the trip. Told myself it was just because I didn't want to lose it while wine tasting. Julius had booked us separate rooms, technically, but we both knew that was just for the expense reports. He kept saying things like, "What happens in Napa stays in Napa," and sometimes we deserve to just let go and live a little. The first day was all fancy wineries and expensive lunches. Julius knew everyone, or at least acted like he did. He'd order these elaborate tastings, tell stories about his investment properties, make plans for all these future trips we'd take once I was part of the executive team. I kept taking selfies at the wineries, posting them with captions about professional development and learning from the best. Tagged the company page and everything, like that somehow made it less of a lie. I promised Carter I'd call every night, his one request, which he'd made so gently it hurt. "Just so I know you're safe," he'd said, like I was still someone worth worrying about. I remember sitting on the hotel bed that first night, Julius in the shower, staring at my phone and thinking about Carter probably heating up his dinner alone, waiting for my call. I told myself this was networking, career development, stepping stones to success. That Carter was great but simple. That he couldn't understand ambition like Julius did. I kept picturing this future where I'd be driving my own Tesla, living in a house with one of those wine cellars Julius kept talking about. Never mind that Julius's hand was creeping higher on my thigh with each glass of wine, or that I'd stopped mentioning Carter's existence entirely. The whole weekend felt like some kind of fever dream. Expensive restaurants, private wine tastings, Julius constantly talking about all the doors he could open for me. I started believing maybe this was my real life, and everything with Carter had just been some kind of practice round. Like maybe this was what I'd been meant for all along, and I just had to be brave enough to grab it. Then came that stupid phone call. I was already pretty tipsy from the wine tasting. One of those fancy private ones Julius had arranged in some underground cellar. It was getting late, and I remembered I'd promised Carter I'd check in. Julius kept saying to forget it, that I was free this weekend, but something in me still felt like I had to make that call. I don't even remember exactly what time it was. Everything was warm and fuzzy from all the wine, and Julius wouldn't stop messing around while I was trying to talk. He kept grabbing my waist, pulling me close, whispering stuff in my other ear. I remember giggling, trying to push him away, but not really meaning it. You know that flirty "stop it" that actually means keep going? Yeah, that one. Carter's voice on the phone was so normal. Asking about my day, telling me about some minor thing that happened at work. God, he sounded happy just to hear from me. Meanwhile, Julius was being more and more obvious, probably on purpose. I kept getting distracted, losing my train of thought. Then I heard it, that shift in Carter's voice. That tiny pause after he heard Julius laugh. "Who's there with you?" The way he asked it, so quiet, so careful, made my stomach drop even through the wine haze. I started rambling about bad reception and how I was with the training group and needed to go. Julius thought the whole thing was hilarious, kept trying to make me laugh while I was obviously panicking. I hung up claiming the signal was cutting out, but I knew. Something in Carter's voice told me he knew too. The worst part? Julius acted like it was some kind of victory. Kept saying things like, "Now the real fun can start," and "You're finally letting go." I remember staring at my phone after hanging up, watching Carter's contact photo, this goofy selfie we'd taken on his birthday, fade to black. The room was spinning a little, and not just from the wine. I woke up the next morning to this really sweet text from Carter. "Hope the rest of your training goes well. Love you." It made me feel physically sick. Julius was already up, ordering room service, talking about which wineries we'd visit that day like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just destroyed something I couldn't take back. The rest of the trip was a blur. More wine, more fancy dinners, more of Julius's hands all over me. But that phone call changed something. Every time my phone buzzed with a text from Carter, I felt this weight in my chest. Every time Julius talked about our future, I had this nagging feeling that I was burning bridges I'd regret. But I kept going, kept playing along with Julius's plans, kept ignoring Carter's sweet texts, kept pretending this was all part of some grand career strategy. Even took more stupid selfies at wineries, posted more fake stories about professional development. The lies were piling up so fast I could barely keep track of them. I knew, somewhere in the back of my mind, that Carter wasn't as clueless as I wanted to believe. That quiet, "Who's there with you?" played on repeat in my head. But I told myself it was too late to go back now. That I'd come too far, burned too many bridges. That Carter would forgive me anyway, he always did. God, I was so wrong about that. I should have known something was off when I got home. Carter picked me up from the airport, still being the perfect husband, but something was different. He was quiet, not in his usual comfortable way, but like he was watching me, waiting for something. I kept babbling about the training sessions, showing him these random photos I'd taken of presentation rooms between wine tastings. The confrontation didn't come until that night. We were getting ready for bed, and he just asked. So calm, so direct. "What's really going on with Julius?" My heart stopped, but my mouth went on autopilot. "What are you talking about?" I tried to sound confused, innocent, like he was being crazy, but Carter wasn't playing around. "How drunk were you that night on the phone? What actually happened?" I could feel the walls closing in, but I doubled down, started deflecting, making it about him. "Why are you being so insecure? This is my career we're talking about. You're supposed to support me. I thought I was handling it, turning it back on him, making him doubt himself. But then he did something I never expected. His voice got really quiet, really serious. Just tell me the truth, Audrey. If our marriage means anything, if I mean anything to you, just be honest. We can work through anything. I love you, but I can't live with lies. Something about the way he said it. I saw this opening. Carter always forgave me, always put us first. I thought I could work with that. So I broke down, started crying, telling him everything, how Julius had pursued me, how I'd gotten caught up in it all, how it was just for a promotion. I kept saying it meant nothing, that he was the only one I really loved. I remember pressing against him, kissing him, promising it would never happen again. I could fix this. Carter would forgive me because that's what Carter did. He was my safe harbor, my backup plan, Then he pushed me away, just pushed me away and said, I fucking knew it. Just like that. No anger, no yelling, just this. Let's just say he was done with me. He walked to our closet, pulled out a bag that was already packed. He'd known the whole time and was just waiting to see if I'd tell the truth. I started panicking then. Really panicking. Begging him to listen, to understand. But he just looked at me with these eyes I'd never seen before. I recorded everything he said. The phone call, this conversation, all of it. Then he walked out. Just walked out. I spent that night calling him, texting him, leaving these desperate voicemails about how we could work it out, how it was a mistake, how Julius meant nothing. But Carter's silence was louder than any response. He wasn't playing this game anymore. He wasn't going to be my safety net. Looking back, I think that's what scared me most. Not losing him exactly, but losing the certainty that he'd always be there to catch me. I'd gotten so used to Carter's forgiveness that I'd stopped seeing it as a gift and started seeing it as a guarantee. God, I was stupid. The divorce papers came exactly 3 days later. Along with them, Carter included copies of everything. The phone records, the credit card statements showing dinner dates I'd claimed were client meetings, and worst of all, the recordings. Not just the drunk call from Napa, but our entire last conversation. Me confessing everything, thinking I could manipulate his forgiveness one more time. Julius kept things going for a while after that, but it was different. No more fancy dinners or wine tastings, just quick meetups in his office or hurried drinks after work. The promotion talks got vaguer, the timeline less certain. I'd catch him checking out the new hire in accounting, making the same comments about potential he'd once made to me. When he finally stopped answering my texts altogether, I wasn't even surprised. Just empty. I'd sit in our rental house, the one Carter had paid up for 2 months because even in leaving, he was more decent than I deserved, staring at my phone, 2 numbers I couldn't call anymore. 2 men who'd seen the real me and walked away. The recording was what really destroyed me. Not just with Carter, but with everyone. It got around at work somehow, probably through Carter's friend in HR. Everyone heard me casually admitting to everything, heard me trying to manipulate my way out of it. The same people who'd been supporting my career growth on Facebook now walked past my desk without making eye contact. I couldn't afford the rent on my own. Funny how you don't think about things like that when you're busy blowing up your life. My friend Megan let me move into her spare room, but I can tell she judges me. She heard the recording too. Everyone did. Sometimes I catch her looking at me like she's trying to figure out how she never knew who I really was. These days I'm sleeping on a borrowed mattress, eating microwave dinners, and trying to pretend my Facebook posts about choosing happiness and living my truth don't sound as hollow as they feel. I scroll through photos from the Napa trip sometimes, all those smiling selfies with their fake captions about professional development. They look like evidence from another life. Carter's doing well, from what I hear. Got promoted at work, started dating some kindergarten teacher who posts about how lucky she is to have found such a genuine man. Julius hired 2 new sales reps last month. I saw on LinkedIn that one of them is already getting the special mentoring treatment. The thing that keeps me up at night isn't losing Carter, or even getting played by Julius. It's realizing that I had everything I actually needed. A man who loved me enough to forgive almost anything. a stable life with real potential for growth, friends who respected me. But I was so busy chasing some fantasy future that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. Some nights I find myself hovering over their numbers in my phone. Carter's is probably changed by now, and Julius hasn't responded in months, but I still can't delete them. They're like bookmarks to a story that could have gone differently if I'd just. But that's the thing about reality checks, right? They always come too late.